carries, they don't put as much importance on the crowd control and on a well-played front line, which really is important for these team fights.
And you can see at the bottom of your screens very similar bans to what they threw up last week, but now the RNG is on the red side. They're forced to bring up the Kalista. They're still banning away the Xayah. I'd be surprised if they still banned away the Ivern, but things like Lulu, Tristana, Janna, all available, along with the Jarvan being taken off by Royal.
Yeah, one big change here. G2 takes out the Twitch, which Uzi put to very good use in that late game. As you said, Trist is definitely still available, along with Kog'Maw, so probably those would be the two that we're looking at trading, and G2 jump back on the Lulu. Again, RNG have the option for that Janna that they have used so effectively.
And you would imagine that Royal right now would look to try and get themselves the Sejuani and the Tristana if they're just looking to play meta, and G2 can then answer with a Varus, who we've seen can match the Tristana in the laning phase, especially paired up with a Lulu.
We'll have to see how well G2 Esports can work around that 80 carry if they lock it in. Of course, Ming, 3 games played, 3 Jannas already. The Rek'Sai's locked in for MLXG here on the side of RNG and taking their time as we open up day 2 of week 2.
Already going to see maybe a little bit more early game here. Warrior Rek'Sai, all the rage at the moment. And MLXG is definitely one of the junglers that at any moment can go for an experienced Quint for a quick level 3. He can even go for level 2 ganks. It's definitely a lot of options here for him.
Now G2 already setting themselves up for what will be a big team fight scaling engage composition. They should have pressure if they lock in this Tristana. But remember, last week they actually banned away the Kog'Maw from Uzi. This is a guy that's famed for his mechanical prowess and his legendary status throughout making multiple world championships, and now he's putting in a position to carry for his team once again.
And one of the reasons I really like RNG actually locking that Kog'Maw in first round here is because they basically have the guaranteed possibility of the third pick Janna for themselves, and Kog'Maw plus Janna is one of the most obscene combinations that we have in the current meta. Ardent Sensor is pretty much mandatory right now, and Rage Blade users are the ones that can abuse that the most, and Kog'Maw is the premier Rage Blade user, so all things really come together when you get that combination, plus the fact of, oh, she has this AoE disengage and can apply it to everybody.
All right, so no surprises yet in ban phase 1, pick phase 1. As we're getting into the second phase of bans, those solo laners now need to start answering questions. Vedius, where do we start looking here? Because Expect last week, of course, didn't really play those traditional tanks. We saw the split push options. You know, what else do they start to look towards here?
Well, if you're G2 Esports, I'd really like to see them facilitate with another tank. Go for the very classic meta of double tank, double carry, Ardent support. And Royal, they could look to get a similar sort of thing, so we're likely going to see a priority on both the Cho'Gath and the Maokai. The only concern for Royal is that right now they don't have any reliable engage. We've seen many Rek'Sais come into compositions, and it's very difficult for them to really force fights because of their single target knockup, which doesn't really classify as a good engage.
Yeah, that's the reason we've seen so many of those come from the top lane, and very well could be the case here for Let Me. Let Me had some really good Cho'Gath performances specifically, and that is definitely still available. But one other interesting thing with Kog'Maw as well, since he does so much magic damage, is that it's one of the few times when you have possibilities of running attack damage mid laners. That's why G2 banned out the Jace pretty early on there. Xiaoyu has used that previously. Here they're going to lock in the Syndra. There's some crowd control for you. She at least does have a long range stun and can sometimes actually start up those sieges.
And this makes a lot of sense as well when you think about all the mid lane bans. It kind of forces Perks onto something like a Corki. Very safe, scales very well, but G2 then will have a decent mid game spike, but it also gives RNG the option to make sure that Let Me is in a significantly bad top lane matchup.
Good takeaway here with the Cho'Gath, I think, for Expect. And this is a guy that we're looking to kind of step up even more for G2, as he's kind of gone under the radar for a lot of the games here at Worlds so far.
Now we'll see what sort of performance he puts on the table. Last time around, or last week rather, Shen and Na left a little bit to be desired, but on the side of G2, Corki to round out the team composition. We're seeing this more and more, especially with all the bans.
Now RNG could go for the Shen themselves here. It does fairly well into the Cho'Gath. We saw Longju utilize it fantastically yesterday, and while you think initially Rek'Sai not a great engage, it synergizes very nicely, but instead they're just going to focus going for that tank. He does struggle a little bit up against the Cho'Gath, but he's going to provide plenty of utility, and he has that good flanking option, especially synergized with the Syndra.
I really like like the Maokai locking here for RNG at the end. With the area that you can control with the ultimate just synergizes so well with the way they want to play the 5-on-5 fights, having the Kog'Maw, Syndra, and Janna kind of protect each other in the backside. So this looks like it's going to be, no surprise, meta draft for both teams, and we might have another one of those long games.
And we need to see whether or not G2 can handle themselves this time around. They were so close last week. You heard Jat on the analyst desk talking about some of the early game from G2 Esports. What do you think of how they're going to handle themselves early into mid as we look at the team comp here, Vidius?
Well, I think they have pressure top. I think they have pressure bot. I think mid is fairly even, except Syndra's just kind of obnoxious in the mid lane. So for RNG, a lot of focus is going to be on what can MLXG do. Because one of the big advantages that MLXG has as a player is he is not afraid of anyone. He loves to invade. He loves to utilize early game pressure. When you have Syndra in the middle lane, pressure is abundant.
The good old double-edged sword of not having fear. Sometimes fear can be a healthy thing.
It can be, but when you're the 3-0 team in the group, it seems like it's working in favor of Royal Never Give Up. The crowd, you can hear them roaring already. Definitely behind their number 2 representative, of course, coming up against Europe's number 1 in G2 Esports. I love seeing the crowd and I love hearing them. And of course, this will be kicking off day 2 as G2 Esports take on Royal Never Give Up. Of course, the last time these two teams faced off, it was RNG that managed to pick the game up.
And just as a reminder, all of Group C games will be played today. We will find out the next 2 teams to make it into the quarterfinals. But let's focus in on G2 versus RNG, an extremely pivotal matchup going in ahead of today's game.
All right, so ping's already coming down for, possible starts from G2 on this red side. They did see both junglers aware of each other. Now, if you are looking at the junglers as well, as you always should be in the early games, you always kind of take account of all the crowd control from the lanes, and that is one of the things about the Corki matchup into Syndra. Yes, Corki, we've seen multiple solo kills by Corki players in this tournament, but it's almost always after the Trinity Force on the enemy solo laner. So Syndra, in the early stages, does have CC to actually set up ganks for Rek'Sai quite well, and Perkz will have to navigate his lane kingdom a little bit more carefully in the early stages.
He also has chosen not to go for the cleanse, preferring the later value of the teleport off into a side lane, which means that if Xiaohu is able to land the stun, you get the immediate follow-up from MLXG. That's going to be a very swift kill down onto Perkz, and you may find a new king in the middle lane.
All right, Xiaohu, of course, king of Group C already. Going to be helping out MLXG and Letme over on the chicken camp. This will give MLXG a little bit of a head start as over on the other side. Expect them trick, double teaming, working on that blue buff.
And you've got to pay attention to this Sejuani Cho'Gath combo as well, because it's something that a lot of opponents often forget. In terms of the early game, there's a surprising amount of burst from this Sejuani. And when you have so much utility in a Cho'Gath and a low mobility tank in the form of Maokai, you can go for early ganks in the top half of the map if you want to try and set up your tank for success. It can be a bit of a gamble because it leaves open the bottom side map in terms of pressure, and that's going to force Sven and Mithy to play a little bit more reserved. So there's a big trade-off if Trick decides to invest his time up there.
Okay, we'll see the decision-making is Sven and Mithy doing some aggressive trading there with Uzi and Ming.
So we're checking in on the runes here for MLXG. He does, in fact, have one of those experience quints, but he's going for a full red side clear anyway, so he will be level 3, and he will end up on the red side. He's fairly healthy and could possibly go affect that lane early on. You mentioned the Cho'Gath, but Maokai also has decent CC for setting up those ganks early on, and that may be where RNG want to get started.
Where does MLXG go with this? Expect sticking around in lane. Oh, he's pushing past the river. This is so risky. Expect's got flash available and level 2. Double knockup, flashes away, follow-up from Letme and MLXG. This should be simple. 200 HP and Royal, they back away.
Such a good double rupture there from Expect to get out of that alive. Knocks them both up, lands the slow, and then he can flash afterwards for the distance. Meanwhile, though, Trick is going to take advantage and get the blue buff counter. Basically your payment for a top lane gank at this point.
Remember what we talked about earlier on, if you invest time top, it gives over pressure to the bottom side of the map. And given that Sven and Mithy have already pushed that wave underneath the tower, it gives Trick the freedom to steal away that blue. So we'll get a bit of an experience advantage as Xiaohu runs through the river.
All right, keeping my eyes there on Xiaohu, whether or not he's moving to the bottom lane. Very quickly mention that Ming is now the only player in Worlds groups who remains deathless. just want to see whether or not he can keep that streak alive, because RNG, they have looked great so far.
They definitely have. And now we're going to look to see if he can actually go make use of that burn flash on top side, because he did pay his blue buff in order to burn it. One of the other things that you can do instead of just counter jungling, of course, is leaving behind those wards, and that does help with tracking MLXG. They have the timers on all of his red side camps, because you immediately assume that he went Raptors red. Krug's very easy to assume that, and they just saw him down on the blue quadrant, so they basically have the next minute for MLXG kind of mapped out here, and G2 should be able to play safe during that time.
But it's MLXG, man. We talked about how he loves to play aggressive. He is kind of that double-edged sword player, and even though G2 should expect where he's going to go, he is that unpredictable aspect of him that's always looking to try and get early leads for his team.
And of course, one of the guys that he's been trying to help out a lot, xiaohu in that middle lane, getting close to level 6, as we've touched on. Perkz, of course, getting fairly close himself. Take a little closer look at some of his stats. A 30 KDA on xiaohu. Pretty phenomenal performance overall. He's also only given up a single death, 81% kill participation on the side of RNG. And as we were looking at picks and bans being one of the primary stuns, you know, that AoE zone control, going to be some pressure on xiaohu as we move into this mid game where G2 have shown weaknesses from week 1.
Also, just coming into the tournament, there were very high hopes for xiaohu. Many of the analysts rated him very highly on the top 20 Worlds players. High expectations of him as well. But we have to move away from xiaohu as you see a gank up in the top lane.
All right, as we jump to the top lane, Letme's been engaged upon, silence ruptured, and gonna look away. G2 get first blood.
This is the combo we were talking about, and also remember that Letme had used his flash earlier from the gank from MLXG, and it was Trick that is able to early punish rather than RNG. So G2, they get first blood on the board.
That's huge for this top lane, because Letme had blown his flash offensively, and we always talk about how offensively blown flashes rarely punished, but a nice return there from Trick is able to get that first blood for G2.
G2 maintain 100% first blood across all 4 of their games. MLXG is going to look for a reply though, but with Valkyrie and Flash, a little optimistic.
Plus the wards that Trick left behind on his invade into RNG's red side quadrant of the jungle allow them to see MLXG on that mid lane approach. Here's another look at how it started out though. Rupture lands from Expect to start it out, and Trick knows there's no flash on Letme, so it's going to be an easy flash in for him and get the stun.
I don't know why Trick decided to use his flash there. Perhaps he just wanted to guarantee the crowd control, but regardless, he will land that CC, they will get the kill, and G2 off to a good start, but not that significant of a lead just yet.
No, it really isn't. Of course, Letme's got a small CS advantage thanks to that gank earlier in the day. MLXG clearing out fairly well. Sven and Uzi, by the way, they have backed after this 6.5-minute laning phase. The cull is yet to proc for Sven. He's got himself a big friendly sword to go up against the pickaxe as well as double daggers on the side of Uzi.
Yeah, Sven has definitely been one of the early adopters of the call as far as the way the meta has been trending here, and he actually has been playing it very well in the early games. A lot of good stats for Sven and Mithy.
And we have to look back at the last time these two AD carries matched up, because Sven, he was all about that early game dominance. He had a pretty significant CS advantage over his lane opponent, but things really started to shift come the team fight.
And of course, that's their average CSDs across groups. The TF KDA is the team fight KDA, and that is any situation where there's a 4 versus 4 or more. So 4v4s, 4v5, 5v5s. Uzi, just with a casual 15 team fight KDA, it helps when you're on the 3-0 team, of course.
It definitely also brings up the memory of that fight around Baron, where he just came in and wiped the entire team of G2 and really started to shine.
Memory or nightmare, depending on your perspective, of course. Mithy and Sven deciding to go forward, rocket jumping backwards as Ming was setting up that Howling Gale to interrupt. Good chunk of damage down into Sven, no summoners blown yet. And Mithy, well, actually this whole bottom lane getting closer to their ultimates. There we go, just dinging for Uzi and Ming, slightly ahead of G2's duo lane.
So now the question is, when do G2 start investing their resources bot side, or do they even bother? Because their composition does scale well, but so does RNG's. Both teams have a big frontline tank, both have hyper-scaling AD carries, but you always look at that Kog'Maw and you think, in the late game, he's a really terrifying champion to deal with, especially when he's backed up by a Janna, who's kind of the queen of peel in the current metagame.
Queen of peel, 4th game in a row for RNG, and in terms of week 1 performances, it was G2's mid-game decision-making, mid-game shot calling that arguably cost them several games. Let's see how well they have improved at his trick. Throws out the Glacial Prison. That's going to get the flash from Xiaohu. Good reaction time from RNG's mid laner.
Yeah, good reaction time. Also, always a worthwhile trade for Sejuani. You know, slightly low cooldown there on the ultimate. And Xiaohu, you have the two options there. Since there's no follow-up CC, he could have instantly cleansed it as soon as it hit, but he then probably would have taken more damage from at least a Frost Bomb or something. Maybe an auto attack from Perks with the package. So
exactly.
He immediately wants to flash out of there. Doesn't want anything crazy to happen.
I think it was the package that he was truly scared of. And also, you talked earlier on in the game about how we've seen Corkis get solo kills down onto Syndra. Having that flash not available is going to give G2 a big advantage. As now, G2 roam down for the Dragon.
All right, Dragon starts off by MLXG, takes a lot of damage. Void Rush comes out, Dragon tags Perks as well. MLXG gets away, Perks gets the backup of Miffy, and all of a sudden G2 might be smiting this one down. Teleport cancelled from Expect as Trick secures it. Can RNG do anything on the back end? Perks takes a chunk of damage as RNG back away. G2 get first Dragon.
Yeah, that was a slick escape from MLXG, but we got a glimpse of the double-edged sword there. G2 happy to slip in and take that objective. As you said, it did come at a cost though. So teleports will be desynced, and with Perks using his to get back to lane now, there is actually going to be a TP advantage for RNG.
And they have the opportunity to force things down in the bottom lane. You can see that Uzi has a fairly healthy CS advantage in the bottom lane. MLXG also poised and ready with his Skirmisher Saber to look for these kind of early fights, and they could try and force something down the bottom lane as MLXG is already making his way there.
All right, Void Rush is on cooldown though. Let's see how they're going to try to stick to target. Xiaohu coming around through the river. No flash available. Sven and Miffy. Summon a heal already used. The Howling Gale connects. Sven's thrown out the Buster Shot. Interrupts the rocket jump. Now Sven's in trouble. That's RNG with the first kill of the game, and they back away.
RNG don't even need the teleport because they burst Miffy down before he can even use his ulti. Getting that crucial kill onto Miffy and also setting up their bottom lane for success is a great way for RNG to answer back the first blood.
Oh, MLXG, he's been spotted. Trick's flashed over for this one, but there's a turret. Now all of a sudden, Trick is used the flash, didn't really get anything for it.
It looks like MLXG with some quick reactions there was ready for that. As soon as the flash comes over and the ult is in the air, he clicks on the tunnel. So even though the stun lands, still slides on out.
And I still have horror memories of Sven getting caught by those Sejuani ultimates last week. But here's a replay of RNG's first kill.
Now, keep your eyes on the vision on the minimap. They ping out Syndra, and that's actually what makes them realize they're in trouble. Unfortunately for them, it's a little too late as MLXG gets the knockup onto Lulu, preventing Miffy from actually being able to use the ult on himself. Maybe he should have done it a little preemptively. You can debate that for days, but the point is RNG get the kill. They are still a little bit behind on goal.
All right, Xiaohu's now being surrounded by several members of G2. Valk forward comes up. Very good stun from Scat of the Week. Perks and Miffy not going to be able to do anything more. It's a 700 gold lead for G2 Esports. They've got themselves the first Dragon, the first Blood. No real control on the tower damage yet. However, we're going into this mid-game on fairly even footing.
I really do like this first purchase that I'm seeing from Expect. You know, he was the guy that got the first blood for G2, so a lot of extra money. Adaptive Helm is so good versus RNG team. Works well versus Syndra, works well versus Kog'Maw auto attacks even, and has magic resist for his lane opponent. So kind of covering a lot of bases there and spending that early money effectively. On the bottom side, however, we may be in for some action.
Yeah, action or the tower. Minion wave going to be the focus here. Sven uses that satchel just to try blow up the wave. Valk forward again from Perks. He's looking for Ming. That's going to be a summon a heal. Eye of the Storm buying some time. Waiting for that E to time out. Trick got the prison. Ming is down. Perks is now on the board. Uzi gets shut down as well as Sven gets the second.
G2 are able to answer as RNG try to commit to that tier 1 in the bottom lane. G2 now may be able to get themselves the first tower of the game.
That juicy first turret bonus. One more auto attack and RNG could have had it, but G2 get the kills. Huge punish right here, and they turn it right back around in their faces.
Last week, Perk said he was going to silence Wuhan, and he does by killing Ming for the first time in Worlds groups. G2 Esports accelerate their lead just like that to 3,000 gold.
So keep your eyes on the minimap once again. Note G2 recognize the hard commitment from RNG, but also note the positioning of Xiaohu. He cannot follow Perks. It is so easy for G2 to force the 3 versus 4, but the flash over the knockup into the hard engage from Trick allowed G2 to catch Ming off guard. They get themselves the double kill, and they get themselves the first tower.
As we come out of the replay, Kobe, I need to just give a little bit of context. In Europe, I love tracking some weird and wonderful dragon stats.
Oh,
it's just
my
a
word.
personal thing of mine. You see this
I'm well aware of
mountain
your
drake?
eccentricities.
The next mountain drake will be the first mountain drake secured, if killed, by any team in this group. Not one of the 4 teams playing today have secured themselves a mountain drake. I find that interesting. RNG, not with RNG, or maybe it is. I don't know.
It's going to make taking those barons and towers all the faster. The game's going to get faster, Trevor. Great analysis there.
I just love those quick stats about random dragons. You know, they just really excite me. Back to the regularly scheduled programming. And G2 Esports, they've got that tower. They've now looking to respond as RNG through the dual lane top.
Exactly that. So we're looking at what G2 are now trying to do with their bottom lane, because it looks like they're grouping up as a 4-man in the middle lane. Syndra is now just arriving as Expect make his way up top. I feel like G2 could just hard commit to this tower. Flash is back up for Xiaohu, but he doesn't feel confident to be able to defend.
Tower number 2 going to be secured. Sven and Mithy were rotated around the map throughout week 1 of groups as tower taking menaces. And they're on the same path. The package is used to get into the pit. MLXG burrows out! The prediction from Trick, and Perks gets another. They turn their attention to Herald and G2 Esports. They might be on the way to a win.
Fantastic punish from G2 onto MLXG. He still had the flash, but I don't think he had vision of Trick. Because of that, Trick saw the burrow, he lands the ult, they secure another kill, and they're going to get a Rift Herald off the back of it.
This is quite the snowball here for G2, taking so many objectives in a very, very quick amount of time. Now there's only one outer turret left up. Another Drake, as you said, the mountain one is about to come up. We'll see if they can use the Rift Herald in conjunction with starting that one up.
We're also seeing how much G2 has learned from last week, because they were in a very similar position. They took 2 outer towers and they were making their way towards the 3rd. They had the Rift Herald too, and that's when Sven got caught out of position. But so far, they definitely didn't get this many kills, and this is where they were able to find it.
All right, look at the replay here. MLXG on the lower health. Rek'Sai
Had vision.
problem with the, Rek'Sai, as soon as you start the tunnel, you know exactly where she's going to end up. It's a fixed distance, so.
You're also animation locked, I believe, so he couldn't flash out the middle of that too, which meant that he was kind of destined for death after he chose the tunnel option.
Well, that means G2 have got themselves a sizable lead. It was around 3,000 gold. Last week, they had an average gold lead of 1,700 at 15 minutes, an average of 1,500 at 20 minutes, and that's a unique Herald spawn.
That wasn't exactly what I meant with using the Rift Herald in conjunction with taking the Drake, but they're going to get both at once, and Rift Herald is going straight for that bottom turret. One interesting thing with the Rift Herald, you can backdoor with it. If you spawn it behind a minion wave, it gets to ignore that minion wave and can go straight for the turrets. That's why people can actually use that to go and take off the backdoor bonus. If you have a champion there as well, then you usually get to finish the turret, but since they stayed on Drake, it's just going to get most of the health.
Wow, that's a good amount of chip damage on that inner turret. And we start to enter the danger zone for G2, at least from the week 1 performance. How much can they learn from last week to this week? How much clearer can their communication get? Although, to be fair, this is a larger lead than we really saw as often last week.
Now, the biggest difference between last week and this week is last week, G2 had a Gnar in the top lane and a Rek'Sai in the jungle. So there was so much more emphasis on them snowballing an early lead, because in the late game, they didn't have a good front line, they didn't have an easy way to engage, and their late game carries were not...
Oh, they're pulling the trigger. Teleport's coming in for Let Me, and RNG want to cut them off.
Expect is trying to match. I can't quite see where he's coming. Straight into the lane. 4 members of G2. Their support now coming from the river. Take a look at Let Me getting chunked down. Buster shot still available for Sven to reset any fight. Silence onto Let Me. Reset's available. Rocket jump forward as MLXG tunnels out to safety. Rupture's going to be needed from Expect. Gets some CC down. Uzi's bark is not as much as his bite. Perks jumps forward, drops a frost bomb in Uzi's face, and now G2, they reckon they want to retreat. The re-engage, the 3-man stun. MLXG shuts down Perks. Silence comes out from the feral scream. Sven continues to push forward. Got the heals and the shields from Lulu. Now G2 are routed, are running. The Void Rush comes out. Body block. Trick looking for the stun. MLXG's double-edged sword stabs himself. Now Expect is the target from Uzi. Running low on mana. The extended fight ends in a 2-for-1.
Yeah, problem with Rek'Sai going in there. After you jump out with your ultimate, can't get a knock-up on the way out. Goes down and an extra kill over to G2 after RNG had them on the run.
But what a long fight from both teams. It felt like G2 had the initial setup. They were the ones that were in the advantageous position. And keep your eyes on the TP that we see from initially Expect was extremely far away, but then this TP from Perks, because he makes it difficult for Let Me to really commit. He's kind of left out to dry, and this is where things start to get messy.
I think it is a good engagement there from Let Me to try and take advantage of the misposition, but he gets focused because there's a slight distance advantage there, and the DPS from G2 are closer, so they immediately burn down the tank. But then when Expect flashes in and Perks valves forward, they kind of expose themselves a little bit here. Good ultimate into stun there from Xiaohu to cut off the rest of the team and allow RNG to focus on Perks.
We also saw what we've seen many times from G2, which was a breakdown in communication at the mid-game. Trick was starting to back while they were flashing in for an engagement, and because of this disjointedness, it allowed RNG to come back in, get a kill, but then RNG overcommit, and G2 get the punish.
Yeah, Rek'Sai ultimate, not really a good engagement tool, re-engagement, because you end up above ground, plus then the silence, and there weren't many options for him after he decided to use that. G2 back out on the field. They still have a very significant gold advantage, and now with the package, RNG have to be fairly wary about some offensive moves.
4,000 gold lead and 2 dragons in the bank at 20 minutes. Take a look at the itemization. Jen says it's double items for Sven. Eye-Edge as well as Static Shift. Got himself the Zeal. Trinity Force has been sitting with Perks for a touch. Righteous Glory for Expect. Over on the other side, it's really 1.5 items.
Yeah.
So there's a big power trough on the RNG side in contrast to G2.
And remember what we were talking about with regards to engage. G2 have a lot of it. RNG are relying very much on a flank, which Let Me now has less options for as an engage happens start.
Another great prison. Ming is shut down for the second time in the tournament. Uzi is blown up under the tower as the explosive charge helps out. That's the 3rd tower of the game. Extends the gold lead to 6K.
Kobe, earlier in the day, you and I were saying, you know what's really good in this meta? CC and tanks. And right now, Trick is proving why as they set themselves up for the Baron.
No hesitation here from G2 on starting up this Baron. They do have the feast from Expect, so you would assume if all things go to plan that he'll be able to, just get that 1,000 true damage off.
We're about to find out. Very close. 1,600 HP. Looking for the burst, and it is secured by G2. Got to hype up the potential steal, but that is now a monumental advantage for the #1 EU LCS seeds.
Now, G2, they simply group up top, and they use the fact that Let Me doesn't have the TP to come in for the collapse. Ming is super squishy. He doesn't have flash. Oh, he does even have flash. He doesn't see the play happening. And G2, very swift dive in the top tower.
You know what's becoming extremely effective in this meta is targeting the support player. Because by rushing Ardent Sensor and investing so much in gold generation, the supports are inherently extremely squishy, and oftentimes the best targets. If you take out the support, you take out the Ardent Sensor, which is the heart of the team fight nowadays, and they jumped right on him. So good move there. Now we'll see what they can do with the Baron.
Well, Sven with that 3rd item completed, by the way, rapid fire cannon. Trick decides to go in onto Xiaohu. The tower's also below. Sven and Perks just blow up. Let Me in the top lane. They're not done sieging yet. RNG are now looking at losing an inhibitor tower. G2 Esports at 22 minutes. They've come to play. Inhibitor turret is down. The inhibitor will be the focus as well. And this will stun not only Wuhan, but many, many onlookers. This was the G2 that a lot of European fans were expecting to see, and they're showing up in game 1.
G2 on track to get the best world record they've ever had. Fantastic snowball of the early game from G2. This is so different from what they were able to do last week because it was in the mid game. They had the early lead. They made one bad decision and RNG were very quick to punish. But G2 this time have not given RNG those options.
And I think punish is something I have to reiterate. It's felt like a few members of RNG have been caught out, which we didn't really see a lot last week. I felt they were in the lead a lot better. All right, let's see. Glacial Prison is available for Trick if wanted. Throws it as somewhat of a zoning tool. Uzi takes a big chunk of damage. as the inhibitor tower gets poked down, and G2, they've still got a minute and a half on Baron. Rupture on Let Me's not going to be the engage tool that they're looking for, Vedius, but the tower's the focus.
Ooh, G2, they're very close to the engage.
All right, there's the stun comes down. MLXG throws out the Void Rush, dashes out, gets feasted, I believe, by Expect. Silence now comes down to Xiaohu. He uses the cleanse, caught up by the Rupture. Follow up, the tower's still not dead. Sven leaps forward with the rocket jump. They're in a 5-on-3, and they've got Baron and powered minions in the base.
With Baron and 20-plus second death timers on 2 members of RNG, G2 can just end it right now, or at least look to.
Well, going to get some damage down onto those Nexus turrets. Let Me is just not tanky enough. He does not have enough armor to deal with Sven right now. The Nexus turret gets chunked down by that Tristana E. Let Me continues to take some poke. 3 seconds before MLXG is back up and available. The first Nexus turret is down, and Perkz lives up to his word, silencing Wuhan as they're 1 tower away from the Nexus.
Fantastic performance from G2 overall. Rather than split up the team, they decide to just group. RNG get desperate, they realize they have to try and force an engage. They go on to Sven, but he just flashes behind his front line, and all hell breaks loose for RNG. They gradually pick them off 1 by 1 and get themselves their second inhibitor.
Yeah, RNG definitely had a chance to right the ship earlier in the game, namely around that top lane team fight. I think it was still fairly close, and they have a decent, scaling to rely upon, and then Jenna Kog'Maw to come back. But at this point, you can see inside the base during that fight, G2 have snowballed so effectively so early on that it becomes very difficult for RNG to actually come out ahead in one of those team fights, even if they're the ones to try and start it off.
I keep bringing the attention to Sven's itemization. It sounds like a bit of a broken record, but Guardian Angel +2 Zeal items and Eye-Edge at 25 minutes? Good luck dealing with that.
Exactly. He's so far ahead. He already has his crit multipliers that he has the luxury of getting this Guardian Angel this early on. It's one of the reasons why, if you look up statistics for items on a lot of the websites that are popular now, GA has one of the highest win rates on almost any champion. It's because people get it. When they're so far ahead, they're like, oh, good. You want to kill me? It's not going to break my streak. He hasn't died yet. He wants to keep his deathless streak going for the game, and it looks like he might be able to do that.
So much of a win more item in the new version of the Guardian Angel, but at 25 minutes with G2 looking likely to close this game out, this blows the group wide open. With RNG sitting at a potential 3-1 record and G2 going 2-2, it now makes every single game from here on out so much spicier.
But we've seen teams in this position before, Quick Shot. You only have to look back to yesterday where we thought the game was over for Gigabyte Marines, and then teams have gotten miraculous team fights to keep the game alive. So I never really want to count a Worlds team out just yet.
Oh, I agree. 13,000 gold, Supers in the base. I'm going to count RNG.
That's a lie. He wants to. I can see it in his eyes.
But I think it's very exciting for the rest of the games. Of course, Samsung Galaxy taking on 1907 Fenerbahce next. We'll see what that record does. Regardless, inhibitor turrets in the top lane still barely standing. And G2 Esports going to usher in those super minions to the inhibitor. Wuhan is starting to cheer and celebrate and give some support to their hometown heroes in RNG.
But G2, they're just looking to end the game. 5 members are topside, and Perkz is on the Nexus.
Oh, G2, they're shutting it down. Regardless of what happens, the inhibitor turret now falls. Expect and Perkz back away. They are pulling RNG in too many directions. Trick gets a stun up onto Let Me. Still simply not tanky enough to deal with the damage that G2's putting out. The third inhibitor will fall. Looking at the player cams, G2 Esports on the verge of picking up the win. They miss. They so desperately want a last-ditch effort. Engaged from RNG. 2-man knock-up into the silence. The front line is dying. Let Me is gone. G2 focusing down the Nexus, and G2 Esports demolish RNG.
G2 with a very convincing game over RNG. Perkz successfully silences the crowd.